Welcome to the meeting. We have already reached the scheduled time and we have formed a quorum. Let's call the meeting to order. And my apologies, we have advanced today's meeting by half an hour because we do have a very long agenda. So let's get started. Item 1, confirmation of minutes of the last meeting, and we haven't received any proposals for amendments concerning the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of October. So if there are no objections, then shall we confirm the minutes? Okay, so minutes confirmed. Item 2, information papers issued since the last meeting. As you can see on the agenda, there are 4 papers. They have been they are from members or other green groups hoping that certain items be included in the list of outstanding items for discussion with regard to incense trees and also illegal ivory trade and also low emission zones and the Clean Air Network's suggestion that there should be designation of low emission zones at busy corridors. Well, these have been included in the list. As to when we're going to discuss them, we will have to wait for the response from the administration. As you can see on the list of outstanding items for discussion, actually on the 5th of November, we have talked to the Bureau Director and also Undersecretary for the Environment about the list. So both myself and the Deputy Chairman sorted that out with the Bureau Director and Undersecretary. And if anything further to suggest, then please let us know, and then we'll see what we can do about them. Item 3, item for discussion at the next meeting. For date of next meeting, 15th of December, and the administration proposes to discuss only one item. That's PW P533 is about 5233DS is about sludge treatment facility, and if it's only one item, I think it's a bit too few. So I'll take it up with the administration to see what other items can be included. So instead of spending the entire 2 hours on just one item, and indeed for sludge treatment facility, it's not very controversial. I don't think it will take up 2 hours for discussion. So let's see what we can add to the agenda for the next meeting. Alright, now on item 4, let's invite the administration team to join us. As you can see, item 4 is the environmental impact assessment permit for the 3-runway system project. So it's an additional item in response to the request by Dr. Kenneth Chen with regard to the EIA and also some follow-up action. I've also accepted the advice from the Deputy Chairman because there is an urgency to this item. That's why within the original agenda, I've added this additional item. I do hope that members will understand this. With us today, we have Mr. Chin Wan, Deputy Director of Environmental Protection, and Mr. Tan Kim Fai, Assistant Director from the EPD, and Mr. Louis Chen, Principal Environmental Protection Officer, also from the EPD. Shall we invite the Deputy Chairman to brief us on the content of your letter and the reason why you'd like to raise this for discussion, and then I'll invite the administration to make an opening statement before the floor is open to members. Okay? So over to you, Deputy Chairman. Would you like to say anything before we start the meeting? Yes, I raised my hand because I'd like to speak, and I'd like to thank you for making this special arrangement and advancing the meeting by half an hour in order to accommodate my request. So I'd like to know if the administration would like to do any PowerPoint presentation. So I'd be prepared to listen to their presentation first before I ask questions. Okay, so can I invite the EPD to brief us on your response before I open the floor to members' questions? Who would like to speak first? Yes, Mr. Chin Wan. Thank you, Chairman. On the 3-runway system projects EIA. we have already presented a paper number CB bracket 1245 stroke 14 to 15 bracket 03. So we have set out the process of the EIA and also the justifications for issuing the environmental permit. I'm sure members have already gone through the paper. That's why I'd just like to highlight 3 points. Number one, the EIA is a statutory procedure, and the purpose of that is to balance the need for development and protecting the environment. That's why we would like to come up with an objective criteria so that for projects that meet the criteria, they can press ahead. And that's the purpose of the EIA system. Second is about the technical scope of EIA that involves a number of disciplines. So it's not just within the scope of work of the EPD. And given the different engineering perspectives and scientific disciplines, we also have this statutory authority to deal with that in order to ensure that there will be professionals and experts to deal with the process. And finally, concerning the EIA, the EPD has considered very carefully the views submitted by different stakeholders so as to ensure that different departments will be looking at the issue from their own perspective to ensure that we will be able to meet all the statutory requirements and standards before the permission is given. So the process is objective, professional, and our attitude is impartial and unbiased. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the floor is now open to members. Because of the time constraint, during the first round, I'll allow for 4 minutes each. All right, first, Deputy Chairman Dr. Kenneth Chen. Thank you, Deputy Director, and all the officials for responding to our question with regard to the DEP's issue of the environmental permit to the third runway project. But then there are a number of issues that we have to face up to. I'd like to remind those of us who just joined the council in 2012. In fact, on the 23rd of April the same year, at the panel meeting, members approved a motion, and the motion was about the third runway system, and it asked the airport authority to conduct a strategic environmental impact assessment and also community return assessment, and also the carbon dioxide emission implication in order to assess the impact on the surrounding environment. The reason why I refer to this, that's because follow-up action has been taken by the relevant subcommittee on this. And with regard to the decision taken by the director on this occasion, I believe that concerning the social cost and also social return and carbon dioxide audit or carbon auditing and so on, I think that we all need to follow up on that. We should not just think that with the permit being issued, nothing further can be done or will be done. That's why I've written in to ask that the director and the officials be there to answer questions. That's because of this. And also because of this, I hope that after the permit is issued, I'd like to express my personal regret about this, because as you can see, well, in the HKAA's submission of report to the ACE, there are many outstanding issues, including the protection or conservation of Chinese white dolphins, and also the reserve areas, and also waste management, noise issues, and so on. A lot of these have got much to be desired. So why do we not wait till after all these have been taken up? So there are altogether some 22 items which have yet to be finished. Why have we not looked at all these issues before we issue this conditional permit? And if you look at the conditional permit, apparently they say that 1 month or 3 months before the commencement of works that you can submit a mitigation plan. I think that's really worrying, because what we are most concerned about is that you're going to do damage before you remedy the situation. But then if you affect the habitat for the Chinese white dolphins, and if you just do it slowly by designating the marine reserve or marine park, that would be too late. So my question is, would the administration be taking this more seriously and you should designate the marine park, and also for the 20+ project, you should have completed them before you should allow them to run the or start the project, instead of allowing them to do the damage first before remedying the situation. That's most enraging to me. I think this issue is pretty, this question is rather leading. And concerning the blueprint, why they have issued this conditional permit, I think the administration will need to explain in greater detail. So I'll be giving more time to the EPD to respond to that. Mr. Chair, if you can, please give us a more detailed reply, because that would also help save many repetitive questions that might come later. All right, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members, for your questions. And here, I'd also like to explain a bit further. Just as I said, the EIA process is a statutory procedure, and we have objective criteria under the mechanism. And this is also a very transparent set of criteria. That is, we have this document. That is the technical memorandum on EIA. So we just call that the technical memorandum on EIA process, and it sets out all the steps that have to be taken and the factors that have to be taken into account, and in different areas like air, water, noise, and what we are most concerned about the ecological impact. So there are objective criteria before the permit can be issued. So in a process, what we have to bear in mind and what we need to look at, as far as the airport's development is concerned, alright, the airport authority has also engaged a consultant who looked at the various developments and also the impact on the environment. He has conducted an assessment, and he would also compare that with the criteria and whether there might need to be mitigation measures, and also in the operational phase, certain criteria will have to be met. So the consultant has come up with an assessment and recommendations, and then our different departments, for example, within the EPD, we also have some colleagues, and in other cases, we also have other departments like the AFCD and also the planning department, which will also be looking at the macroscopic issues like the arrangement of the airport, and then the highways department would also conduct traffic impact assessment, and then the civil aviation department would also be looking at the figures for the landings and takeoffs and so on to see if they are credible. So after we have conducted the assessment, then in accordance with the law, we think that it's an EIA report that can be approved. But then in approving the EIA report, and in between this and the mitigation measures that will have to be put in place before the commencement of works, in fact, there is still a gap. And therefore, despite the fact that we have issued the environmental permit, in the light of the permit, they will then start the detailed design, including the design of the runway and how they're going to go about the reclamation. We do impose a lot of requirements on the reclamation, and they will have to take certain measures. And also the priorities to be set. So they will have to come up with a detailed design, and then this detailed design is not confined to the airport itself. It's also about how the works are to be carried out. And another point is what you're most concerned about, that is the impact on the Chinese white dolphins, and therefore in the future they also have to designate a 2,400 hectares marine park, because they would be reclaiming some 650 hectares of land, and they will have to make up for the area for the white dolphins.
And in the process of the EIA, you would see that the 2,400 hectare marine park, would that be enough compensation? And is that reasonable compensation? Of course, the AFCD would consider the whole EIA and then decide whether the 2,400 hectare park is appropriate. But then as for the detailed design, there are still many details not yet decided. After the approval and before the construction, the marine park, the airport runway, there would be a lot of details needed to put into the design. And so there would be conditions linked with the approval. We want to make sure that everything should be in compliance with what is listed by the EIA, but the details of the design should still be submitted to us for approval. There is a need to come up with a design to submit to us. We also have to consider other departments' comments, such as the AFCD's comments and their views, and then we would also consider the EIA's proposals before we approve the ultimate design, and only then could the construction begin. For designs that is directly linked to construction, it must first be submitted to us before construction begins, because some of the construction can only commence after approval from us. So we will need to make adjustments based on the different designs. There would be papers submitted at different times for approval before construction could begin or before operation commences. Chairman, I know that time is limited. If you could speed up your response? Well, because I use 4 minutes, and I respect your discretion so that there would be more reasonable discussion. Well, actually, you could first start off with the marine park and to let the Chinese white dolphins have a habitat, or are you going to first start with a runway? Because you're making the damage first before you conserve. I think you should first provide a habitat for the CWDs before you start construction, before you start your damage. Other than the public would believe that you have already done what you should be doing, which is to provide a natural habitat for the CWDs. So this must be something made clear. Secondly, I hope that the airport authority would give us paper, because the marine park belongs to all of us. It's not private. So we're talking about public funding, policies, public interest, and the environment. So I hope that you wouldn't just think of money. I think we should take the steps one by one. Chairman, Vice Chair, I'm sure that other colleagues will also address these issues. I'm not going to ask Mr. Tse to address this right now. Well, please remember we have 4 minutes each, not 12. Mr. Kwok. Thank you. I'd like to follow up with the marine park. Well, you talked about the technical memorandum. You know that this has not been, no changes have been made since 1997. The technical memorandum, there are many details that have not been mentioned about how to conserve marine ecology. Well, we want to know about the detailed timeline. When is it going to be built? How much money are you talking of? What is the cost? Mr. Chen Ka-lok asked whether you are going to first conserve and develop later, or are you going to develop first then conserve? So I want to know which one is going ahead first. I hope that you would tell us more about the marine park. If possible, Chairman, I hope there would be a paper addressing the concerns regarding the marine park. Well, perhaps we could ask Mr. Tse to address the question first to see whether his answer could satisfy your concerns. Thank you for your question. Of course, there are comments and views on whether we should build the marine park before we start construction. We have actually considered this possibility. However, we're not saying that we're going to set up a marine park in a far away place. We're actually going to build a park around or surrounding the airport. So if we need to reclaim 650 hectares of land, there are going to be a lots of construction in that area, and it would be very difficult for us to start with the marine park. The marine park can only be set up only after construction has been completed. So we cannot first build the marine park before we start construction on the runway. So this is the reason why we are not able to have the park before the development. Well, of course, we're not going to just damage everything near the marine park. We want to try to minimize the damage as much as possible. There is not going to be massive piling. You have to deploy different methods, and not just to do piling right on the seabed. And of course, once you have the park, the speed of the ferries or boats would be limited. The high-speed boats or the high-speed ferries would affect the dolphins. So therefore, we're going to limit the speed. And during the process or during the construction process, we're going to have people appointed to see whether the Chinese dolphins would come near the construction area to make sure that the Chinese white dolphins would stay away during the construction period. We want to minimize the impact on the dolphins as much as possible. We are going to reclaim 650 hectares of land, and that means it's going to limit the living area of the dolphins. So we want to try to come up with a functional compensation. Well, they've lost 650 hectares, so we are going to build the 2,400 hectare marine park, and that entire area would be closed to high-speed ferries so that the dolphins could have a better habitat to compensate for the loss of the 650 hectare. So we're not saying that we're going to damage first and develop later. We're just going to try to provide the habitat for them after we've taken up 650 hectare. Well, Mr. Fan, well, when we had a meeting in August, the report given by the airport authority sent us a paper, and we only talked about the conservation of the Chinese white dolphins and the issues of pollution. But the AAHK at that time didn't give a clear response. Members at that time said that if the AAHK cannot come up with conservation measures, then they are not going to approve the EIA. But at the September 2nd meeting, the airport authority did not send representative to attend the meeting. Instead, they only submitted a paper, and it was a closed-door meeting. And members changed their attitude after the meeting and decided to support and approve the EIA. On September 1st, before the meeting, the administration said there would be 2 parks, one in the Sokku area and one near the airport. And the members were worried that this is something in compensation for the marine park near the airport. But the WFF of Hong Kong said that there is actually no mitigation measure to really help alleviate the problem, and the measures might not be adopted because the airport authority Hong Kong's paper said that if it's unfeasible, then the measures would not be adopted. And the marine park is actually 1 hour away from the airport. It can actually not act as a substitute for the habitat for the Chinese white dolphins. So why would the members suddenly change their attitude and decide to support the EIA? Mr. Chan Kar-lok now requests the director of the EPD to not to approve the permit. I think this is actually something we should look into. Mr. Zhe. Well, if we want to ban the permit, we need to go through procedures as well. We have already explained why we need such an environmental permit and our reasons behind it. That if you want us to ban the permit, we don't see any reason behind it right now. You've raised some points that we are all very concerned about. To hold a marine park near the Sokku area and in the northern part of Lantau. The administration has all along planned to build marine parks in those two areas. I think you should know that these were very early decisions made years ago. A marine park would actually be conducive to the survival of the dolphins, because a lot of dolphins live in that area, and it's actually an area needed for conservation. The administration has always wanted to build marine parks in those two areas. The AFCD's proposal on these two parks only reiterates the point that the administration has supported all along. If we look at it from the view of the EIA, there is actually no direct link between those two parks and our plan right now. The marine park, of course, would help the CWDs with their habitat. I've already listed out some mitigation measures during the construction period. The AFCD believes that it already complies with what is needed to protect the dolphins, and that it is reasonable. Mr. Ho Chun-yan, thank you. Well, yes, we understand there is a need to build the third runway, but I don't think you are adopting a comprehensive mitigation measures. Well, I may have a different view on what you define as marine park, because the fishermen a few years ago all believed that yes, there is a need for a marine park, but today they are not in support of this idea. Well, you talked about fisheries in the EIA. Do you really understand what fishery means and what the impact it would be on the fishermen? You have to first be able to answer these questions before you can go ahead. You must first understand what impact it has on the fishermen. Can the representative from EPD tell me that with the construction of the 3-1-way, what would be the impact on the fishermen? Who's going to take this question? Thank you for your question. The EIA includes assessment on fisheries. During construction, as it is a place where you could fish, the impact would be low to medium. And after the land has been reclaimed, there would also be a medium impact on the fishermen. I'm sorry, Chairman, I want to know, can you specifically tell us how you define the level of impact? You cannot use low, medium, and high level to lie to the public.
The reason why we said that there would be some impact, as I just said, in the course of the works. Yes, works will be carried out in the vicinity, so they would not be able to go in. And after the reclamation, that is after the runway has been reclaimed, 650 hectares of land, and in the surrounding area that will be designated a marine park, and if they continue to fish there, they will have to get a permit before they can do so, as the honourable member is aware. That's why there would be some specific impact on the fishery industry. But then how many fishermen's livelihood would be affected? He'd like to get the figures as to the number of fishermen who will be affected. It's not just about the impact, whether it's medium, high or low. I'd like to make it more specific. The reason why the fishermen are so strongly against the designation of a marine park, that's because for many decades the legislation has never been amended. All right, if you need to get a permit, yes, you can get a permit before you can go into a particular zone, but then that cannot be passed on to the next generation. And if I am not able to pass it on to my son, and if I have a partner, then he would no longer be able to go in, and therefore how many waters are left in the new territories for fishing, how much area is left for fishing. And also you have another 2,400 hectares of marine park which will be designated. Then how can you assess the impact on the fishermen? Why is it that you can be so specific in the EIA report with regard to the specific details on the impact on the fishermen or the fishery industry? Well, do you have the details? Do you have anything to add, Mr. Chen? Well, I don't have any detailed figures with me. I don't have any concrete data concerning the impact on the fishermen as to the number of fishermen to be affected. But then in the EIA report, it says that concerning the impact on the fishermen in the construction phase, the impact would be medium to low. But then after the designation of the marine park will mean that the fish abundance will improve, and also together with the marine park at the Brothers Islands, that would form an integral part. And with regard to the development of the fish feeds, that would be somewhat better. And the marine park does not completely ban fishermen from going in and fishing. All they need to do is to apply for a special license from the AFCD, and according to the AFCD, within that area, if you look at the number of fishermen who frequent the area, they will continue to be issued with a license. And therefore, for fishermen who will be able to go in and fish, the situation would not be worse off. Chairman, I'd like to express one thing. Stephen Ho, you will have another round. You will have a second round. Mr. Albert Chen, Chairman, I'd like to make some requests and I'd like to express some comment. Number one, will the ACE be submitting to us its minutes of meeting, because the ACE's discussion is important, because back then when the airport was built, I was also a member of the ACE, and there were several major decisions taken by the ECE, the ACE forcing the administration to keep Tung Chung and also the central waters between Tung Chung and the airport. And also they also spent $50 million to set up the dolphin protection area, but then for years afterwards, not much has taken place with regard to the follow-up action. So I'd like the administration to be aware of that. And I've also submitted a 15-page document to the DEP, the Director for Environmental Protection, is about the threat runways assessment, and nothing came about. So I don't know how you deal with such submissions. All right, we just put in the submission, and then for the individuals, you just ignore them and you do not even bother to write back. So whether I've got it wrong or right, I can always seek a judicial review, but then without any reply, then how can I know whether I was wrong or whether or not somebody got it wrong with regard to my submission? So what's your attitude? So is that the way you deal with submissions, or would you be responding to each and every submission separately? Will you be explaining your position to all the persons submitting written submissions? Mr. Chair, with regard to the minutes of the ACE, well, they are available on the web, so they have been uploaded and it's an open document, and maybe we can also provide a copy to Mr. Chen later. With regard to the EIA process for the 3RS, we have received a large number of submissions, and in accordance with the law, we consider those submissions before we take a decision. But then the law does not require us to make a separate response to individual submissions, and given the large number of submissions, there would be some difficulty for us to respond to each and every submission, because I was commenting on air quality, water quality, and noise, and also the survival of Chinese white dolphins and so on. Alright, let's say if I have put in 18 comments, and whether or not you are prepared to accept them, or whether or not you would take mitigation measures to address my concerns, then you should at least have given me a reply. Alright, I spent 2 months in the preparation of this paper, and from the time you released the first document, I already started to prepare this paper, and yet you don't even bother to give me a very brief reply. I think that's regrettable. So I wonder if this panel would be looking at this decision concerning the 3-1 runway system. Will we be holding a public hearing to listen to the deputations? I think that's necessary, because there are many groups who are concerned, in particular for groups that are concerned about the Chinese white dolphins. And also concerning the third runway, it's going to be a death trap in Tung Chung, because air pollution and also the increase in the number of landings and takeoffs, and together with Hong Kong Macau High Bridge, and also the residents in Tung Chung will go up. So the air pollution will mean that there would be more premature deaths. And I think the situation will be very serious, and yet many residents have been kept in the dark. They have no idea that this is going to happen. And in summer, Tung Chung is the most polluted area from 12 to 2. Actually, the risk in terms of air pollution is the most serious there. And the biggest problem now, alright, when it comes to environmental protection and EIA, when there is a development, you would take a decision that would have implications. But then for any decision involving the airport, alright, those factors are not determining factors, but then they are contributing factors. But then with these contributing factors, together with other factors, the implications could be far-reaching. And yet very often, the worst thing about this is that different departments would just share the responsibility. They would always say that this is under the Development Bureau and so on. Alright, 3 policy bureaus are involved. Alright, it's the THB which is responsible for building houses, and then for roads, that's the responsibility of the Transport Department, and then for the development of the airport is the Development Bureau. Alright, they might not have been critical, but then with these 3 contributing factors adding together, that could be fatal. And yet there is no report covering these. So I wonder if we will be engaging our own Research and Library Services Department to look into this, so that we can conduct a study ourselves, so that we will be able to tell, alright, one department says that they will have to build a community of 150,000 people, and what's the implications going to be like? Alright, we have to deal with 2 things. Number 1, your wrong suggestion is for the EPD to consider. So, Deputy Director, please go back and think about it, and please do give Mr. Chen a response. And just now, you also said that concerning the third runway, we should organize a public hearing. In fact, both ourselves and the Economic Development Panel on the 30th of September and the 7th of October, 2 public hearings have been held to listen to the deputations. So as far as the EAP is concerned, we are not going to hold another hearing in the near term. That was during the consultation period. That was not after a decision has been taken by the administration. Alright, for the public hearings, they have been held, and therefore within the same session, we are not going to do it again. But then that was before the decision is taken by the administration, right? But then after the decision, I think it's important. We should not just start with a very big bang and then nothing comes about later, because the decision has been taken and now we are letting it go so easily. Well, as I just said, well, we had a joint panel meeting, but then we can always do it ourselves. I think on this particular subject, it's not just our concern. In fact, the EDP is also very concerned about this. So even if we were to hold a hearing, it would not be decided by us alone. So I'll deal with that later. Next, Wu Chi-wei. What about asking the Research and Library Services Department to do a research? Yes, I'll discuss that with the Secretariat. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai, Director, can I refer you to this? Alright, when we discussed the marine park, there were a lot of obstacles back in 2002 with regard to the Lantau Southwest Marine Park is still being explored. So if we are not able to do that at that location, then concerning the 2,400 hectares of marine park, how can we do it? How can we come up with an effective way of convincing the fishermen so that they would allow you to set up that marine park? So the question is, you talk about the conservation of Chinese white dolphins, and you will have to rely on the future marine park as a remedial measure. That is hardly convincing to the public, because even for the so-called islands and also Lantau Southwest Marine Park, you have not been able to designate it. And if we allow you to go ahead with the project, then what's going to happen? So can the Undersecretary tell us more about this? What are you going to do in order to convince the public that you'll be able to do it, all right, with the approval given the fact that you have already issued the permit? But what if you fail to honor your promise? Then who is going to be held responsible? Is it going to be the Chinese white dolphins? So that's the first question. Second, under the environmental permit issued, okay, the study was conducted in accordance with the criteria laid down in 1997. But how about the Biodiversity Convention? Well, in 2012, it was applied to Hong Kong. So in the EIA process, is there any need for you to conduct another research in order to ensure that for the third runway system, it will comply with the Biodiversity Convention? And third, the 3RS at the airport. The administration has assumed that the third runway can be built, and then in Tung Chung, you can plan for more population growth in Tung Chung Tongs, and 390 hectares of land will be reclaimed in order to have an additional 100 to 200,000 people staying there. So apparently the noise contour can be moved northward. So on this particular point, has the THB discussed with the EPD? So have you explained to them your concept? And on what basis can you assume that the third runway can be done? Who is to answer the question? Deputy Director. Thank you, Mr. Wu, for your question. Concerning the marine park and the designation timetable, according to our current plan, under the permit, the conditions under which the approval has been given require us to come up with a specific design for the marine park, and then the design will have to be submitted to the administration. Well, we're talking about 2002, and it was already approved, and yet it's been 12 years since then, and still we have not designated that marine park. So you're concerned that for the other two, it has taken so long, and yet you have not been able to do it. So why are you confident with this one? That's why, as I said, in September this year, the AFCD looked at Lantau Southwest and also the so-called Islands Marine Park. They've already announced that before 2017 they would be designating the two marine parks, and also early next year they're going to come up with a detailed design, and then there will be a round of public consultation. So long before the commissioning of the third runway, we will see the two marine parks up and running. So concerning the future 2,400 marine parks surrounding the airport, you should have greater confidence, because for the two earlier marine parks, they would be commissioned by then.
As to the Tung Chung area, for all EIA, we have to look at the accumulated impact. We have to look at the current impact and try to estimate the air, water, pollution assessment. Assessment has already been done, or actually assumptions have been done on the area near the airport, such as in Dongchong. What is approved today is only the design of the 3 one-way system and the operations of the runway. We're not saying that, that the Dongchong area has been approved. Dongchong would still need to consider its own EIA, and then based on the population, the air pollution, if the EIA, or let's assume that the runway is built and there are a lot of people living in that area, too many cars, if the EIA cannot be passed, then there is still no green light. So we will make sure that the Dongchong development will also be carried out in accordance with the EIA. We, of course, also look at the ecology. All newly developed areas must first conduct an ecology assessment and to come up with mitigation measures to minimize impact. The EIA actually complies with this spirit. Mr. Michael Tan, Chairman, well, the third runway, I think will have a similar impact as the current 2 runways, which is the noise pollution. Ma Wan is actually heavily impacted. I'm a legislator of the Chun Wan district, and the residents there always complain to me about the noise pollution. The EPD said it's only responsible for the pollution on transportation in the city area, and that the noise or aircraft pollution is actually the problem of the civil aviation department. And actually in January talked about the civil aviation CAD should look into noise pollution, but then CAD said they're not responsible for noise pollution, they're only responsible for the operations of aircraft. So from midnight to 7 a.m. in the morning, how many aircrafts actually go over 70 dBA? Actually, dB nobody knows. There's actually no one monitoring the situation. This is actually quite eerie. There is someone monitoring railway pollution, car, the noise pollution from land transportation, but there's actually no one monitoring aircraft pollution. Well, now you said you want to build a third runway, you want to prove the EIA. There's not going to be any standard in the future as well. So I would like to know who in Hong Kong is actually in charge of aircraft noise pollution. Mr. Tse. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Tian, for your question. Aircraft noise pollution, we're talking about 2 kinds of pollution. One is the airport planning and the planning and design in the nearby airport area. The EPD will base the planning on the EIA ordinance, and we would give recommendations to the planning department. So can you just give me a direct answer? Who's in charge of aircraft pollution or noise pollution? Well, in Hong Kong, we have a civil aviation aircraft noise ordinance, and this is under the CAD. But I have to explain here that the control of this we're not actually talking about the noise pollution from each aircraft. So it is actually a control on the aircraft according to the ordinance. I'm sorry because, well, we know we're very tight on time. No, well, the EPD actually has a standard or an index on the index on noise pollution along the railway. So if it's over a certain number, then you will need to build noise barriers. How come it doesn't apply to aircraft in the sky? I mean, I can't sleep because of railway noise. Well, you know, aircraft pass over my residential area. Why don't you monitor that situation? Well, we have to look at the different types of pollution and the different types of noise. Well, of course, you know, for roads and for railways, of course, you know, we could try to build a noise barrier. But, you know, it's actually very difficult for us to build a barrier for the aircraft. Well, so, you know, can you let me finish on the control methodology? Well, we would try to control, you know, the landing and the taking off of the aircraft and to try to minimize the noise impact near the residents. There is a standard index, but it doesn't mean when the aircraft passes over it, we look at the overall noise. We're talking about CAD. The CAD is in charge of it. No, but you know, but they said they're not responsible when we talked to them the other day. Well, Mr. J, can you just tell us directly who's in charge of aircraft noise pollution? Who's setting the standard? If it exceeds the standard, who would be in charge of penalizing the aircrafts? Well, what they do is to try to control the taking off and the landing. There's actually a standard on that. It's called NEF, the Noise Exposure Forecast Contour 25. But no, Ma 1 is not within the Contour 25. No, it just said it needs to comply with the NEF Contour 25. I think Ma 1 is around Contour 23 or 24. That is within the limit. Mr. Tian, because, you know, time is up, well, you can go for a second round. Okay, we've completed the first round of questions. Now we start the second round. 2 minutes each. Mr. Albert Chan. Well, Chairman, you don't really have an ordinance right now. I think we've talked about aircraft noise pollution every year. I bring residents over to the CAD every year. You know, they approve the aircraft landing and takeoff, but they don't monitor the noise pollution. Let me use San Francisco as an example. There's actually an ordinance regulating it, and it even controls the aircraft. Because when you land at a different angle, it actually affects the noise emitted. So when the airplane is off the angle by about 3 degrees, then you would be fined. And other than looking at the average number, individual aircraft models actually emit different noises. But in Hong Kong, the administration keeps on saying that the CAD communicates with the airlines and that they would discuss the problem, but they never tell us about the regulation. So it seems that nobody is monitoring. Also on air pollution, what is the emissions of aircraft? It actually affects the residents. Well, I think I raise this issue each year about the Dongchong noise and air pollution, but nobody ever answers my question. The administration tries to monitor the air pollution on land, but actually air pollution emissions emitted from aircraft actually affect the Dongchong residents as well. Well, if the results of the EIA don't measure up each year, the administration still doesn't need to be responsible? If you look at the EIA in the 90s or the assessment done in the 90s, I think there's actually way behind the real situation. Now you still don't do anything about it. I just want to put this on record. You're now passing the EIA, and it's really unreasonable, and there's no protection for the residents. Thank you. Mr. Hu Chi-wei. Well, 2 points. I agree with what Mr. Albert Chan said. The panel should hold a hearing to hear how the public thinks of this EIA. Secondly, I want to go back to the marine park. Mr. Tse did not address my question right now. What I asked was if we agree to go ahead with the marine park, but the marine park that is supposed to be built in Southwest Lantau should have been completed many years ago. We've talked about it 15 years ago, but it's still not yet started. So who's going to be responsible for it? There are many mitigation measures in the EAA, but it seems that there is no specific timetable when the park would be completed. And if you could not meet the deadline, who is going to be held responsible? Well, of course, it would be too late then, because it would bring disastrous consequences. But you talked about the spirit of protecting marine ecology and to have a biological ecology. So who's going to be held responsible if it's not completed on time? Mr. Tse? Well, let me first go back to the spirit of having a multi-diversified ecology. Hong Kong's plan, well, is still not completed, but the EIA is very important to the protection and conservation of ecology, and we are trying to comply with the international spirit. Time is up. Mr. Michael Tian. Chairman, the CAD tells us that they are not responsible for aircraft noise pollution. Should the same department be in charge of being monitored and being the monitor? Well, setting standard and monitoring should be one organization, and those being monitored should be another organization. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called checks and balances. Well, EPD sets the standard, and if it doesn't comply, and if someone complains, then the EPD would conduct another assessment, and then they would just make changes. But how come the noise emitted by aircraft is actually monitored by those who set the standards? Well, you open up all these routes, but then the CAD is monitoring itself, and it says that noise pollution is not its main concern. It doesn't even have a standard. No matter how who sets the standard? What is the standard? Nobody can answer this question. How come the EPD doesn't set the noise emitted from aircraft, from landing and takeoff? It doesn't matter how you set the standard. You can look at the average dB at night, or you can set it for the average dB per year. Why don't you do this? Would you go back to the administration and just suggest to the administration that you should be in charge of all the noise pollution? Well, thank you for your suggestion. But it really depends on the efficiency of each department in monitoring the pollutions. Or no no government can really set a standard for each aircraft, because the aircraft, you have to look at the International Civil Aviation Department to set the standard.
So to be more specific, it's not up to them to decide. Next round, I think this is misleading because in some jurisdictions, actually they have the maximum noise level as a standard. They said that there isn't such a standard, so I think he's misleading us. Next, Mr. Gary Fan, I think there are so many members who have commented on the environmental permit on the third runway. Given the fact that it's highly controversial, Mr. Chairman, can I suggest that we should organize a public hearing inviting deputations to come and meet with us? So, Chairman, may I move a motion here, hoping that this council can organize a public hearing so that we can discuss the specifics with regard to the third runway system. Yes, just on this environmental issue. No further comment? Well, as I've already answered that point earlier, well, on this particular subject, together with the EDP in September and early October, we already held 2 public hearings on the subject. I don't think there is a need for us to do it again now. So there is no need for a third hearing to be held now. Well, this is your view, Mr. Chair. So we'll listen to other members' comments. Yes, there is another thing that I'd like to deal with now. Just now, some members asked that the administration should submit 2 supplementary papers. One is about the timing for the setting up of the marine park, the boundaries. So can the administration provide the details after the meeting? And just now, Mr. Stephen Ho also asked about the specific figures concerning the number of fishermen to be affected by this. So can the administration provide a figure? Sorry, Chairman. When the airport was built by the airport authority, they made a number of promises about the dolphin sanctuary. So can they give us a report on that? What happens afterwards? So that was a promise that they made in the 90s. Okay, so we have asked the administration to provide the supplementary papers, and some members suggested that we hold a public hearing. So I'd like to listen to the comments from other members here. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, you said that you're in favor, and how about other members? Yes, Mr. Albert Chan seconds. If there is no objection, then I'll go back and check with the EPD, and I'll talk to the chairman of the EPD, and then we'll take a decision as to whether we're going to hold it. Mr. Kenneth Leung, please do not try to expand the scope, because if we are going to organize a joint panel hearing with the EDP, then there might be too many subjects. In fact, all we need to do is to look at air, noise, and other pollutions. Indeed, there might be different aspirations and demands, and we'd like to give a further chance to the administration to address those concerns, and of course the administration will have to do a bit more homework. So I think we need to have a more focused public hearing on environmental protection rather than other economic issues. Thank you. Mr. Tony Chair, I don't have strong views about holding a public hearing or not, because as you said, in September and October we've already held 2 hearings, but then after the issue of the environmental permit, some members suggested that we should hold another one because there might be alternative views, and also concerning the request for mitigation measures, and also they'd also like to get hold of more information through the web. I think that could also be considered. But then if we were to hold another public hearing, in fact the third runway and its impact, well, is pretty broad in scope. And if you just look at it from the environmental perspective, yes, there might be some comments or views. And during the earlier hearings, the reason why we held it with the EDP. That's because the third runway would also have huge implications on our future economic development. What's wrong with holding a joint public hearing with the EDP? I think as a member, we should listen to more views. So I think in terms of resource deployment, I think it would be more efficient if we hold the joint public hearing with the EDP, and the deputations should not be subject to this restriction that they should only talk about environmental issues. Yes, Dr. Elizabeth QUAT, with regard to the EIA for the airport, it's been some 2 years since the process started, and there were 12 items under the EIA process. They've already done a very detailed work, and some mitigation measures have been put in place or have been proposed, and different groups have also been involved in the discussion. I've also taken part in many discussions, and I understand that there are some groups that have organized some forums and so on, and we are now at a stage when the DEP has already issued this environmental permit, and he has also imposed some conditions. And under the EIA subcommittee of the ACE, it also made a number of recommendations as to what conditions should be attached to the permit, and it has taken on board comments from the public as well. I'm not suggesting that we should not listen to public opinions, but then many of these are rather repetitive, and given the current situation, when we should be monitoring the actual implementation of these mitigation measures. So if, Chairman, you think that you'd like to hold a public hearing, then I think we have to look at broader issues, and therefore I agree with what Mr. Tony Chair just suggested. So should we restrict it to just one perspective or what? Anyway, whatever we do, while the project is at different stages, I think the nature of work should be somewhat different, and therefore in the past some deputations have come, and if the same deputations will be coming again, then I think that might not be very conducive. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, I'm not ruling out the possibility of listening or meeting with different deputations, but then Chairman, you suggested that we should hold a joint hearing with another panel. That's why I said that well, we always welcome that, but then if we are not able to do it, if we are not able to coordinate with them, then in the light of the issue of the environmental permit, what are the public's views on this, and what do they think about the mitigation measures, and in the process of implementation or execution, are there anything specific that we'd like the administration to follow up on, instead of what we had before, that is after the permit has been issued, they would just press ahead with the works, and in the end whether or not the mitigation measures were effective or not is still doubtful. Alright, any further comment on this item? If not, then from what I gather, apparently there are more members who are in favor of holding this public hearing, so I'll ask the Secretariat to schedule a date, and then we'll inform members. Next, item 5054 DP, further enhancing quality of coastal waters of Victoria Harbour, and we have from the administration, Under Secretary for the Environment, Ms. Christine Low, and Ms. Amy Yun, Assistant Director, Water Policy from the EPD, and Mr. Terence Choi, Acting Principal Environmental Protection Officer from the EPD. So I'll first invite the administration team to brief us, and Under Secretary, please be brief. I'm sure the members have read the paper already. And then I'll open the floor to members' questions. I'd like to remind members that in discussing this item, in accordance with Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure, before you speak on the subject, please disclose the nature of any conflict of interest, and please have your attention drawn to Rule 84. That is when you have to cast your vote on any matter, then you will have to declare the interest first. Who would like to do the presentation? Under Secretary or Chairman? I'll again ask my colleague to do a very quick presentation. He's turning on the computer, and I'm sure you would support this item, but then you might just want to clarify further about the cost implications, because some members have indicated to us that the cost might be on the high side. That's why we'd like to give you a clearer account now. So as soon as my colleague is ready, we can start with the presentation. Can I just read out the names? Priscilla Leung, Wu Chi Wai, Kenneth Leung, Lo Wai Kwok, Tony Chair. So I have these names for the time being, so 4 minutes each. Chairman, I'm ready. All right. Thank you, Chairman. With regard to further enhancing the quality of coastal waters of Victoria Harbour, in fact, all along we have had the HEADS, and since 2001, we have seen that the overall water quality of Victoria Harbour has improved. But then for nearshore pollution is still very much a concern. So that's the problem. So that's the inshore water pollution. And maybe we can explain that by the aid of this. So if we do a projection on the basis of E. coli, then we'll be able to see more clearly. All right, for the dark blue part, that's the area with lower E. coli concentration, and then for the green part is higher, and then in the orange area is the highest. So you can see on the left hand side that even with HEADS stage 2A completed, well, for the relatively inshore areas, in terms of the pollution, according to our projection, the situation would be pretty serious. Well, for E. coli count is not a very good indicator for smell. Still, it indicates the pollution level. Concerning this problem, in recent years, with further developments on both sides of the harbour, mainly in West Kowloon and also Central Kowloon and also Wan Chai Causeway Bay and so on, we have some territory-wide waterfront development. That's why we have to improve the waterfront environment. I think there has been a growing concern on this. Just now, I also said that with HEADS stage 2A, still we have some nearshore pollution. I think the situation is relatively complex, and there are multiple reasons. For example, there might have been some different activities. For example, roadside shops, business operators, and so on. They might have dumped the garbage into the waters, and also there might have been misconnection between foul sewers and storm drains, and that's why some water might have gone into the storm drains, and during inclement weather that would also give rise to bad odor. And also there's been some marine refuse, grease or oil at sea that might have caused the odor and poor appearance. And the purpose is to reduce nearshore water pollution in order to improve the environment of both sides of the harbour, in particular both aesthetic and odor. We would also like to work out a program to improve the environment in the nearshore environment. The reason why we have to conduct this consultancy study, in fact, with regard to nearshore pollution, we do not have a lot of data. And in specific areas, because of the long-standing concern, we might have got hold of more data. And in different areas, well, since we are on nearshore pollution, but then the reasons might be different. That's why we have to conduct an evidence-based review and environmental investigation, which will provide important data to identify the site-specific solutions. And when we do this study, in fact, there are some field studies or surveys, as you can see. We'll be collecting some sediment samples, and we will also be conducting the baseline studies. We'll be getting some water samples, and we will also be conducting visual inspection and odor patrol. And then for the problem areas, we will have to conduct more detailed man entry survey. On the right hand side, you can see that we will have to have people climbing down the septic tanks in order to trace the source of the odor. We will also have to collect water and air samples. And as we have said, in conducting the survey, we will look at nearshore problems. But if we have to trace to the root of the problem, it's not just confined to the waterfront.
So let's take a look at the map on the right. It's West Kowloon area. In more problematic areas, you're looking at actually the drains, the storm drains, and you would need to look into the back alleys and to look at the catchment areas. So you would need a lot of people to consider to look into such surveys. A consultancy study would allow us to come up with targeted measures for specific locations. Of course, we must consider the situation and to prioritize which locations should be conducted or looked into first. And these would also justify our measures and decisions on initiatives. Our district council colleagues can also help us out by analyzing the survey. We consulted stakeholders in March and April of this year, and also 9 relevant district councils in the area, the Advisory Council on the Environment and the Harbourfront Commission, and they're all in support of us conducting a consultancy study. And for the relevant district councils, they're actually pushing us to conduct this consultancy study as soon as possible. If we're able to seek funding this year, we hope to start the study next year, and we estimate the consultancy study will take 24 months, and we're talking about 80-odd million. Okay, 4 minutes each. Dr. Priscilla Leung. I think in today's conflicting world, water quality is of importance to everyone regardless of age and gender. So I do hope we'll be able to do something to enhance the water quality. I remember that I've also pushed a motion on this before, and in August of this year, we also invited some of your colleagues to do a site visit with us. And of course, we hope to gain more data. First of all, we know that in enhancing water quality, of course, there are man-made factors leading to accumulated pollution. And of course, that would involve other departments. For example, more adequate monitoring of old and depleted buildings would help us to improve the misconnection situation. Well, of course, I hope you would be able to lead the study. But if you're unable to do this, would there be someone of a higher level, such as the C of A, to lead the study so that the EPD would work together with other departments? Would there be such a breakthrough? That's my first question. Secondly, yes, we do need funding. 80-odd million to really enhance water quality is not a huge amount of money. I've suggested recruiting water quality experts, those from universities. And some water experts that have been trained, but they find it difficult to get a job. Would there be someone whose expertise lies in water quality to monitor the situation? Well, I think that it's already very late of you to come and seek funding now. We've looked at this problem for many years. What is something we can do to involve other departments? We want to assist the EPD to better communicate with other departments. And we have suggestions for long-term measures. there may be illegal water or water emissions from boats and ferries. Some of the grease might not come from old buildings. They might actually be emitted from boats illegally. Okay, 40 seconds. First of all, we are going to liaise with other departments. If we want to achieve an ideal plan, there must be evidence-based data. We know where the problem lies. What do we need to do? What kind of behavior should we carry on? There must be an evidence-based study to support it. Thank you. Mr. Wu, I still have a few seconds. How about the recruitment of experts? We'll think about it. Yes, we would consider. I can say that in future, this project would involve many people, and there would be plenty of opportunities. I'm sure there would be lots of job opportunities for water experts in the future. Mr. Wu Chi-wei, thank you. I see that there are many illegal behavior that has led to pollution. For example, misconnections and sometimes unsuitable disposal of waste in wet markets. I think related departments have the responsible to do something. Well, you said there's no evidence, but if you go to the refuge stations, you go to the wet markets, you see this evidence all around you. Are they not willing to execute any measures now, or do they have to wait for your report to come out? There are lots of problems near Victoria Harbour. Well, yes, of course, we need to execute orders, but the number of people arrested or caught may not actually be the core problem. We need to look at the misconnections of pipes, drains. These we must first conduct study before we really know the answer. How about I follow up with this question? Some of them are actually very obvious offenses. As I said, a wet market situation. This is under the food and health. Well, I'm sure you've also seen how they clean the markets. Well, sometimes, they just pour out the water. If there is a need, is there actually any measures that they could take? Is there anything that they can do immediately? Because this is something the Food and Health Bureau could do. Well, I agree. If we need to really pursue the misconnections, then I'm afraid that your 86 million would not be enough. I'm not sure how much money is already spent on that. Would the 80 million be enough? Because, I'm afraid that you use the money for conducting a study, but the study area, well, we know already. We just need to find out the root of the problem. If we just want to collect some evidence, the methodology listed in the paper might need to be more clear. Well, I'm sure that it's clear, Chairman. My colleague can tell you in detail how comprehensive our study would be. Of course, we cannot pick on each and every point, but I'm sure that we're talking about a large catchment area. Ms. Yoon, please. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wu, for your question. When complaints are lodged, our colleagues would, of course, take action. Well, let's say there are misconnections, then they would follow up. But very often, we can only, target complaints. There may not be comprehensive data to look into other problems. Our study would really target the area in the Victoria Harbour to conduct baseline surveys. As Mr. Wu said, there are some offences that are very obvious, but we do want to know the different reasons behind it. What is more important? What should we prioritize? This would be something we'll be able to learn from the study. Well, we have to study what kind of water is used for cleaning the wet markets. We need to collect certain evidence. Sometimes we wonder or we query whether there is really a situation of misconnection, and then the departments, if feasible, would try to follow up. And of course, once with data, we'll be able to try to make improvements to our infrastructure as well. Mr. Kenneth Leung, thank you. Well, I'm sure the public would agree to enhancing water quality, but what is your ultimate goal? Do you want Victoria Harbour be suitable for swimming, or do you think that it would be all right for them to have a fill cups of water and still be fine? What is the ultimate goal? Mr. Wu Chi-wai has already asked my second question. There are already obvious reasons behind the water quality, for wet markets, even for Chinese restaurants, the people would just throw out their dirty water in drains. We know a lot of people do that. Is there any ordinance or regulation right now to forbid people to dump dirty water in drains? If you know this is one of the reasons behind the pollution, and why do you have to conduct a study to collect evidence? Well, I understand you want to enhance the quality, but you already know that there is such a problem. Thirdly, I'd like to ask about the financial situation. In the 89 million, there's like 43 million for on-site study. So this is actually money for field survey and for manpower. So have you calculated how many man hours are needed for the entire project? How about you tell us how many man hours are needed for the project instead of just giving us a lump sum for the field surveys and manpower? Thank you. Mr. Leung. Well, Victoria Harbour is not really used leisurely right now. We see that there are developments along the coastal waters of Victoria Harbour. There are now more residents and more people working in those areas. So we really want to target the odor problem. And of course, that is also closely related to the water quality. We want everyone to enjoy the coastal waters. In the long run, would there be other water activities? Well, we are not in charge of planning, but we do hope we'll be able to catch up with the area's development. Let's say there would be water activities in the Victoria Harbour. We, of course, would hope to work together and try to enhance the the water quality in that area. Well, we can only prevent pollution if we are able to catch the offenders. Yeah, some people do dump water into our drains, into our storm drains. But have you ever caught any offenders?
Well, we can go back and check, but then it's not that easy to catch the culprit red-handed. I need the specific figures. Okay, so can the administration furnish the paper to the PWSC? And there are two figures. Number one, financial implications. Part B, that is a field study, and also the auditing, the number of man hours, and also the manpower that will be required. And as proposed by Mr. Leung, that's about illegal dumping of wastewater. What are the figures? Next, Dr. Hon QUAT. Well, in simple terms, I support this project because in the end, in terms of sewage treatment, however good a job you can do at the district level when it comes to the discharge of sewage, if many people dump wastewater into the stormwater drain, then in the end, however hard you try to improve the treatment facility, it's not going to improve water quality. So we have to target the problem itself. But then we cannot just do it casually without any studies or surveys, and therefore the administration has finally made up its mind to do this field survey, and therefore I support it. But then the scope of the survey would be pretty broad, so apparently it covers many districts. So in all the districts with a dense population, you have you're going to do it. So you're talking about some $89 million. So would that be enough? I'd rather give you more money so that you can do it more in depth. So if you divide it amongst the 4 districts, then you only have about $20 million per district. And if you're able to address the problem, if you're able to come up with a complete picture, then I think you're a bit miserly. So at the PWSC, if we're going to have filibustering to put it on hold, then of course nothing can be done about it. But then I suspect that members would be more than happy to give you more money. So Undersecretary, thank you very much for your support. So by the time when we go to the PWSC, we will provide you with more details. And I'd like to defer to my colleague in doing the calculation or projection. Do they think that is enough? Yes, Assistant Director. Yes, thank you. We have looked at the current situation with regard to stormwater drains. We have done some projection. If you look at the entire Victoria Harbour, as I said, there are 4 priority districts to tie in with the development of the Victoria Harbour. We are not able to cover all the areas, and other than the 4 districts, there are areas like Tsuen Wan, Hong Ham, Sham Shui Po, where there are more concerns, and even Shao Kei Wan. So these are smaller districts with some concerns. So basically, according to the DSD, we look at the number of sand wells and also the drain alignment. So we try to look at that. Of course, if you think that that amount is enough, by all means. But then, in my view, I think I'd rather that you do a more in-depth job than just a superficial job. That's why I'd rather you get more money for that. Very rarely would we say that. Yes, Tony Chair, thank you, Chairman. To further upgrade the quality of coastal waters of Victoria Harbour, we would welcome that. And for the funding that you sought is about $90 million, and it's on a field survey. And as I just said, well, I think the reasons are well known amongst all of us. But then, if you look at the impact of individual contributing factors, we might need to collect more data before we can analyze the situation. But then there are some behavioral things, well, they would change. Well, even if you can spot them, for example, illegal dumping, and also unauthorized use of certain sewers, and also misconnection or deliberate attempt to dump wastewater into stormwater drains. I think you will have to be careful about that, because many have to be dated back to a long time ago. For example, like the Kai-Tak Nala. Alright, sometimes there have been misconnections due to inadvertent mistakes, and these are old cases. But then how about new cases? Well, for the newer ones, if you don't have any mechanism to prevent them from doing that, then even if you conduct a field study today, then 10 years down the road, the problems will still be there. So even if you're able to rectify the current problems, which are identified by your report, yes, you might be able to resolve one case, but then 2 more might be propping up later. So if you do not get to the root of the problem, then it will be never-ending. So you will have to prevent it at its source. Alright, doing this sort of thing is not right. So you will have to put these things back to the right position. Alright, for the $43 million, it will be for field surveys, environmental monitoring, and investigations. So I believe that in coming up with a figure, alright, you have already decided on the scope, and also you have made the estimates, and you think that that's enough. But then in some cases, after opening up the cover, you may not be able to tell exactly how serious the problem is. So what is going to happen exactly? Well, my colleague will supplement. I fully agree with what Mr. Chair said just now in his analysis. Yes, there are 2 types. One would be the infrastructure problem, so there might have been misconnection. Others, they have done it arbitrarily, and others have been caused by human errors. So they just pour the wastewater into the stormwater drain. Well, one is infrastructure problem, and the other is alright, you can still prosecute people if you see them engaging in such activities. But I think in Hong Kong we need to have this behavioral change. I hope that this time, with the experiment, with the survey, we have the empirical data, and then we can analyze the data. We can also work hand in hand with other departments, and then we can come up with a government-wide plan. That is, if we want to realize the dream of enabling people to get close to the water, then everybody will have to pay a price for that. And for the government, we have to be the enforcement agency. We will have to spend money on the infrastructure. That's why before we embark on this program, we've been to the districts concerned, because within the district we also have to work closely with the stakeholders. Where necessary, we will have to make sure that there will be this social behavioral change. Yes, Tony Chair, on the monetary or the financial implications, can we ask a bit more questions? Well, later, please. Yes, Kenneth Leung, I think other colleagues have said, well, Mr. QUAT, all right, Hong Kong is surrounded by waters on all fronts. So we all want to see an improvement in water quality. But honestly, from the time when I started to read the paper to the time when I listened to the presentation, apparently for the source of our water, we all know where it's from. So it's not that we have no idea as to where it comes from. And now you say that you're going to do this field survey. You will have to get the evidence so that you will have all the concrete evidence before you point an accusing finger at others. Yes, we have to do it no matter what. But then for the known sources, so we are just trying to increase the evidence collection. Why does it have to take 2 years? Why can't we finish it earlier? So that the policy direction and also the future and also the distance between us and the water can be narrowed. So why does it have to take 2 years? That's the first question. Second, as we can see, if you look at the $89.6 million being sought for, much of that has to do with the outdoor field surveys. So would it include laboratory testing? Because without the laboratory testing, you will not be able to identify the source. Some might have come from garages, some might have come from fish stores, and so on. So would that include the laboratory testing figure, and in the end would we be given the breakdowns? And also for the misconnection, we all know that this is an existing problem, and after the survey will we be able to locate where the misconnections have taken place, and can you rectify the problem afterwards? Assistant Director. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Kwok. Well, for the known problem, and does it mean that we do not have to do anything further? If you have to take it seriously with regard to the misconnection, a lot of efforts will be required. In the past, we would just be targeting the Kai Tak development, and then in East Kowloon, we have a smaller scale study, and then in Chin Wan, we also did a bit more, and in Hong Ham too. But then, normally, we would just be acting on complaints, and therefore, it's a more focused survey, and then to do it comprehensively, it would be very time consuming and manpower intensive. And then if you look at this slide, if we have to remove the cover, and then if we have to send people into the sand pit, and also we will have to take some air and water samples and do a lot of testing and so on. In the study, we would also be doing the analysis. We would not just be doing the survey, we would also be analyzing the situation. So after the baseline study on both shores of the Victoria Harbour, after we have taken air, water and other samples, we will be doing this, and we have also roughly done some estimates. Well, if you look at the entire area, yes, we are not going to really look at each and every drain cover or drain, but then if you look at the 4 priority areas and also the areas of concern, when it comes to sand pits, we're talking about some 20,000 of them, and for stormwater drains, the length would be up to 600 kilometers. So if we are serious about tracking that down in collecting the water samples, is pretty complicated. That's why we're going to spend a bit more money there. And it doesn't mean that we will wait till after everything is completed before we take action. As to whether or not there might be better ways to do the job, well, when we talk to the stakeholders, they said that we might make use of advanced technology in helping us. Yes, where there is technology available, we will consider the implications and how it can be used. Yes, Mr. Christopher Chong, in fact, there has been significant improvement in terms of water quality around the harbour. And still, if you say that there are areas where we have not been able to reach the standard, then what is missing? Well, as some members have said, I think the main problem is misconnection and also some behavioral problem. People might have dumped some garbage at sea. So, when you do this survey, will you be able to tell us that you exactly know that well, where the drain is connected to and where the source is? And then you'll be able to show us the full picture as to what you need to do in order to track down the problem. Yes, over the past 10 years or so, there has been improvement in water quality, but then taking the Eastern District as an example, there has been misconnection, and you can see that the water color is yellowish, and then in the Shau Kei Wan typhoon shelter, people are dumping everything into the sea, and therefore it's very odorous. So you've been doing that all along. So what are you trying to achieve with the survey? What's the ultimate objective? All right, if you say that there is still 10% problem, so what else has to be done? So can you just come up with a more definitive answer with your survey? Can we get a clearer picture? Thank you. Indeed, we'd like to collect more data through the survey so that we can have a better idea as to the full picture. With regard to improvement measures, that would depend on where the problem lies. And if we're talking about complicated situations, we may have to devise a medium to long-term plan as to how we're going to assess the cost effectiveness of individual measures. We have to be supported by data. And in the past, after we have done some work in terms of improving water quality, most of that would be focused on lifestyle foul water, so that much of it would be processed at the Stonecutters Island, and then that would be completed in the middle of next year. Then the next challenge is in the metropolis area, where there is a dense population. There might be activities resulting in site runoff going into the stormwater drains, and that would not be processed or treated at the sewage treatment facility. That would be more complicated and difficult.
Yes, we have done a lot of work, but what we do is more of an ad hoc basis, just to try to target the complaints received. And sometimes we can't even find the cause or the root of the problem. So we hope that through this study, we'll be able to come up with more data. So can you say that specifically, this data would lead you to find out all the drains, or the origin of the drains, or where the wastewater comes from? Or are you going to set detectors in each area to test or monitor the situation so that you'll be able to follow up more closely? These two questions, please. Well, who can address these questions? Actually, if you say whether we'll be able to find out the origin, yes, of course we hope to do so. But if you want us to be able to find out which flat in a building is responsible, well, I'm not asking you to do that. Well, you could come up with a map or a graph. At least you could see whether the drains of a building, whether if it's misconnected, whether it really linked to the whether it will really link to the manholes, etc. So would there be monitoring measures to see which drain is problematic, so that it will be able to track where the wastewater comes from? Well, Mr. Choi. Well, thank you, Chairman. Well, yes, well, theoretically it can be done, but do you only waste the money and manpower to do that? That's another question. We can only try to seek data from studies, and then to perhaps to tell the residents of a certain flat to connect their drains properly. This is something you need to think about, which is a priority. Ms. Sitho, thank you. Well, you can, if you see the small stores or shops on the streets where they sell local food, when they close the shop, they would just pour the whole pot of curry fishball sauce into the drain. You see this happen all often. I think we need to identify the black spots. I'm more familiar with the Central and Western District. In the older areas in near Kennedy Town, well, there are some misconnections, but you can't really intervene from the origin. I think, all departments, whether it be the buildings department or the FEHD, even if you work together, it's very hard for you to conduct an investigation. Have you thought about, maybe giving back some of the responsibility to the owners incorporated, to let them first try to improve their own buildings, and try to explain to the district councils that the owners incorporated should monitor or to check their own drains? Because even if you have 700 odd people in the buildings department, you still wouldn't be able to find anything, because sometimes you do need to go into a building to find out the problem, and you will need a interdepartmental investigation. So maybe it might be a better idea to ask the owners incorporated to work together with the district councils. Maybe this is something you could consider as a way forward. Ms. Yoon, thank you. We know that there are different follow-up actions in different areas. For certain districts, we do a lot more work and make an extra effort, and some district councils work together with Owners Incorporated. I think those buildings with Owners Incorporated actually do better because they can collect more evidence. But for those that do not, then it might take a bit more time for them to work this out. Chairman, I understand that even for the old buildings with Owners Incorporated, they're still not doing enough. Well, how many buildings do you actually ask them to address the issue of misconnections? Well, there are some major renovation works being done in some old buildings. If you can ask them to connect their drains properly, then I think it might save a lot of money and time later on. Or can you submit a paper to us regarding this issue? Thank you. Second round. Time is tight, 2 minutes each. Dr. Priscilla Leung, thank you. I hope this report is not a sort of tactic to delay measures because, as you said, manufacture is also very important. Causing water quality. I remember in the motion I moved in 2011, I mentioned that there are penalties, but there are some loopholes because resident drains are actually connected to public drains, and there are exemptions for certain public drains, and the penalties imposed is not low. It can be 10,000 and a few months imprisonment. I'm not sure whether the public is properly educated in this area. I know many people who wash cars do not actually apply for a permit. Well, I've been a complainant before, complaining about ferries emitting oil or fuel in the middle of the night, and I know this is illegal. I hope that when you are conducting this study, at the same time, you could also look into whether this ordinance is properly regulated and what kind of work should be done in educating the public. I don't think the public is very familiar with this ordinance. Of course, the goal is to hope that we could one day swim in a reassured way in Victoria Harbour. Thank you. Mr. Wu Chi-wei, thank you. Well, in the study, how much of the work would be follow-up work? In my understanding, many misconceptions are manholes inside the shop or the building. So, do you have the authority to enter the building? And if not, how can you ensure that your study is effective? And let's say there are some misconnections in a building. What are you going to do? Are you just going to send someone to look into the manhole? What follow-up work would be done? Thank you for your question. There are two types of manholes. One is stormwater, one is wastewater. And the stormwater manholes are mainly on streets. And for the manholes in residential buildings, then they are separated from the public manholes. If we use color powder to pursue the trail, our district council would start the investigation. If we find there are misconnections inside a building, we would apply or request the other party to improve the situation. So can the administration also submit a flow chart on this procedure and to give us a timetable on how long this would take? Yes, flow chart and the timetable, please. Last, Mr. Tony Che. Thank you. Well, I'm just worried about the 43 million. Is that enough or too much? Because I hear from Ms. Yun that sometimes you're just looking at the misconnection of the drain. Well, I do think that we need to look into the situation. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to collect any data. You need to collect data and then adopt actions to see what measures need to be taken. It might need a lot of money to improve the situation. So I hope that when this goes to the PWSC, it will become clearer. Everybody is concerned whether 43 million is enough or whether what you're using with so much money. This is only on field survey, so we do want to know what kind of field surveys. The study is going to take 24 months. I hope you can reassure us that even though you're conducting this survey, you are still following up on other issues in your department. You have to consider whether the penalties are effective. Dr. Priscilla Leung also mentioned illegal waste emission in the water. Well, this might also be a root cause. So does it include marine survey? Well, we've noted 1 and 2. Perhaps my colleague can tell you about the third question. Well, of course, we need to find out the cause of the waste, and of course, we will not exclude the situation in the water. Thank you. Well, I don't hear any members objecting to this paper being submitted to the PWSC, so I suggest that we put this forward. Agenda item 6. Emergency sewage bypass incident at Pillar Point Sewage Treatment Works on August 25th of this year. So we have our Undersecretary for the Environment, Ms. Christine Low, and Ms. Amy Yoon, Assistant Director of EPD. We also have with us Ms. Betty Chang, Principal Environmental Protection Officer from EPD, Mr. McCaway, Deputy Director of Drainage Services from Drainage Services Department, Mr. Henry Chow, Assistant Director from DSD, and Mr. Norman Siu, Assistant Director of DSD, and Mr. Anthony Tsang, Chief Engineer of DSD. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the incident. We have also conducted a site visit and in September. I hope that the administration would be brief and to allow more time for questions. There is to be another meeting at 4:30, so we must end on time. So who's going to brief us on the paper? Mr. Zhang? Mr. Zhang, please. Thank you. Please be brief. So this is the emergency sewage bypass incident on 25th of August. We've already completed the investigation and would like to share with you the results of the investigation and follow-up work. Well, you can see it's on the red point. So the sewage would be we haven't completed with the construction this year, and we would actually have the sewage discharge to the Elmston Road. So we can actually discharge 30,000 cubic meters, and water is 20 meters deep, so we can actually discharge 2 cubic meters per second. So you'll be able to see the facilities after construction is completed.
So there is a sieve, and normally it should be discharged 2 kilometers away from that, and after they've entered the plant, then there would be some emergency discharge bypassing the plant, and at the time of the incident. So these are the locations where the problem took place. Or if you look at the filter here, alright, the problem is that the sewage went through the metal bars at the bottom, and then we have these gaps here, and then after filtering through the fine filter, well, through such screens, they would be pushed up, and then that would be brought up by the chain, and then there would also be saw chains. And what happened on that day was there was this chain that broke, and then the entire sieve or the filter stopped operation. So as I said, well, we were concerned about this, and therefore we engaged a professor from the UST, and then he used a water model to simulate the impact. And then after the study, Professor Lee told us that, well, at Butterfly Bay, which is closest to the STW, the impact would be most significant. But then by the next day, the situation was already back to normal. And then for Chinwan, which is farther away, there was no impact at all. With regard to the reason for that, well, as I said, there was an automatic protective device. So there is an electronic protective device, alright, with the fine screen, and also the particulars that were blinded. Well, that would only add to the force, but then we are concerned that if the force is increased, and it might be too much. That's why we have to ensure that it operates at an appropriate level, and then once the strings meets that requirement, then the chain will move backward, and then after a while they would suspend the supply of power, and that would also help protect the entire fine screen. As you can see from the picture, alright, when the contractor started the operation, the protective level was set at too high a level, over 50%. In other words, between the gaps after the chain became loosened, alright, some of these might be pushed back, and then the entire chain fell down. And on the day of the incident, well, with the 3 sets of fine screen, one of them was already not functioning. So out of the 4, only 3 were operating, and then for the first set and the second set, the chain got loosened. That's why they broke down very quickly, and then there was only 1 remaining to take up all the sewage, and then by slightly past 2 o'clock, all the fine filters or screens became problematic. So we believe that the problem after the investigation was with the contractor's inexperience. There was a lack of a sense of crisis. He did not understand that if you adjust the automatic or the electronic protective device, that would only increase the risk. And then on the 18th and on the 12th and also on the 21st, when there were problems with the screen, he did not take appropriate action, and of course he would have to be responsible for repairing it, and he would also have to increase the protective device, and in accordance with the contract, he would also have to be repaired. He would also have to be made responsible, and according to the contract, we have also deducted $500,000 as fine from him. And then for the maintenance contractor, there is also a lack of initiative and sensitivity. That's why we will have to ensure that his ability to cope with emergency situations should be enhanced, and a 3-party joint operation review committee has been set up involving the three parties, the DSD, the contractor, and also the engineering consultant, and also with regard to the inspection of the fine screens, that would be stepped up from once every day to 3 times a day. And then there would also be an independent consultant to review the improvement measures, so that there would be medium to long-term measures. In the first place, the one set of the fine screen will have to be removed, and second, there would also have to be a bypassing arrangement, and then some experienced experts would also be engaged, so that their manpower would be enhanced, and the structural management would also be enhanced. And as far as the engineering consultant is concerned, they would also conduct a reliability and safety check, and they would be increasing manpower, and they would also provide further training to increase the awareness and alertness of the staff on the ground. Thank you. 4 minutes each. And then we have Michael Tian first. Chairman, only now have we been informed, because on the day of the site visit, we were at a loss as to why this had happened. And that will also bring out the issue of any future outsourcing of such construction works. That is a design and operation contract. Well, by design and build, it doesn't mean that the administration can just wash its hand free. Alright, the issue is simple. Alright, on the day of taking over by the DSD, were you aware of this electronic device to ensure that the sewage would remain at a safe level? So, at the time of the incident, were you aware of that? Alright, Director of DSD, are you aware of that? Yes, we are aware of that. A simple answer to your question. That would be even more complicated. If you had been aware of that, then why is it that at the time of the incident, why did you not ask them to design 2 keys, so that 1 key would be given to the contractor, the other would be given to the engineering consultant? So it's like chemical weapons. You will have to have several keys before you can trigger the firing. So at the different beaches, water quality could become very polluted. So did you require them to have 2 keys? Deputy Director. Thank you, Chairman. We did not ask them to have 2 keys. Maybe I have to explain the situation a bit further. With regard to the electronic protective device, actually it's like a key box or a button. It's like a device. On the right hand side, you can see that we have this device box, and it's separated, and it's under lock and key. Sorry, because my time is limited. You know that there is an operational risk. You were aware of that, and you were not vigilant enough. You did not ask them to install an additional protective layers. And what's the point of having this engineering consultant? Why have they not been holding 1 key respectively, so that only both sides agree? Would they be allowed to exceed the water level? Why has that not been done? With regard to the electronic protective device in the fine screens, that has been in use for some time already. Well, that's commonly used, and that does not have to be adjusted from time to time. But then you do have this risk. So anybody sabotaging the mechanism would put you into great trouble. Alright, you can see this device box. You can see all the buttons here. And then you can see the screens here. And then you can see that I opened the screen myself. And you also need a key to open it. And then as soon as you open it, power supply would be suspended. So you do not admit that there was an oversight on your part. You did not notice that there was this risk. And indeed that has happened. And what you felt to be impossible indeed has taken place, and therefore I'm sorry, I have to come to this conclusion that you were negligent. Alright, you have hired this engineering consultant. Did he mention this before? Did he raise this with you? Did he say that he would also like to hold on to a key so that the contractor would not be left alone to deal with this? Well, as far as I understand it, he never mentioned this. So how much did you spend to engage this consultant? With regard to the engineering consultant, I'll ask Mr. Chow to answer the question. Alright, how much have you paid this guy? And if he's not able to raise such issues, then why should you be paying him at all? all right, on his pay or remuneration. I don't have the details with me, Mr. Tian, but then we do have resident engineering staff there, and they're responsible for monitoring the contractor's work. So I'd like you to review it so that you should have deducted all his pay because he has been negligent. If that is the case, then why has he not asked for this additional safeguard? All right, Mr. Tian, let me supplement. Well, for such electronic overloading device, usually it would not have been triggered because in general circumstances, it will only be inspected once every 6 months or 12 months, and it's also under lock and key. For the electronic device, it's a very small one. In fact, this is the device, so it's not the entire box. It's just this small one. So when it has to be adjusted, as soon as you open the gearbox, then the electronic device would not be subject to adjustment, and therefore we have to have registered electrician, and they also have to have this very fine key. By pushing that into the hole, and then he will be able to open the box, and then he will be able to make the adjustment. All right, we don't need to argue about this. All right, the DSD felt that this was not possible, but in fact it happened. That's all. Well, can I supplement? Well, what's your response to Mr. Tian's conclusion? Thank you for the suggestion. We will go back and think about it. But then we also have to take care of the actual day-to-day operation. We have to admit that we do lack a sense of sensitivity. Well, for all such a design and build, when people have to operate such systems, you will have to think through this. Because when there is an incident, if you just fine them $100,000 is one thing, but then if there is anything major affecting public safety, then how are they going to compensate for that loss? Yes, Tony Chair, 4 minutes, please. Yes, thank you. Yes, we have to learn the lesson from the Pillar Point STW incident, and as set out in the paper, some improvement measures are being proposed, and as Mr. Tian just said, it's a design and build contract, but then what we are concerned about is there might be other similar STWs. Well, in a paper, you said that for this particular plant, you're going to improve the facilities there, but what about others, if at all possible? I think the administration will impose the same requirement on other plants, because if this could happen here, it could also happen elsewhere, and if it should happen again elsewhere, it would be quite embarrassing for the administration. So I hope that you would also take corresponding measures elsewhere, and as set out in the paper, you said that everything was back to normal. Or else, well, if it's not operating normally, then of course we would have been told. And at one point you said that you would engage experienced overseas operating and review experts to review the operating structure. All right, that has yet to take place, but when will it be done? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your comment. With regard to the overseas expert, he has already arrived. So he has arrived in October. He has been at work for a month or so, and he has now returned to his country. And now 3 colleagues have been engaged to help him. So these 3 experts are from Europe, and they are very familiar with the operation of sewage treatment plants. And then for the design, build, and operate model, we would like to introduce some state-of-the-art technology. We would also like to introduce some experienced operators to do the day-to-day operation. But then that's the first time when the DSD has done this. And I believe that in the future we will have to step up communication, and we will also set up a joint review committee to deal with such issues in the future. And we hope that overseas experience can play its part here. And then for the local unique circumstances in Hong Kong, we hope that through our close collaboration with them, they would also be made aware of the local situation. So it's a bilateral measure. As regards the question that you raised in para 28, what about other plants? We have conducted an inspection, and in the light of the incident, we have also stepped up training, because most of the sewage plants are being operated by the in-house staff of the DSD. And then in the light of this incident, there has been extensive discussion internally, and they are fully aware of the fact that they should not be adjusting this device casually. And in practice, we would not be adjusting that very casually, and therefore for the other plants, they have already stepped up internal training, and we have already informed them that they should be made more aware of that, and there are areas which they will have to pay special attention to in the course of operation. Alright, there are many details in running a plant like that, and every month, every week, there would be group discussions, and we have to take care of these, because very often it's not just about the system and then you just make a tick here and there, because we might not have noticed that there is a particular device which requires special efforts from the contractor, or they would have to insert a key before they can make any adjustments. So these are pretty rare incidents. That's why we have already reminded the colleagues to share the experience. We hope that we can learn a lesson, and that in the future we'll be able to do a better job.
Thank you, Mr. Jay. You have a follow-up question. I just want to clarify the expert. Well, that he's been here, I'm sure you know there is a deadline. If there are any recommendations, of course we should adopt them as soon as possible. I don't think I've heard the timetable of the administration. Well, Mr. Zhang, perhaps you could address this question. Thank you, Mr. Zhe. It has already been mentioned in the briefing that there are many different measures recommended. There are immediate measures, midterm measures, and long-term measures in order to ensure that the fine screens have now been operating satisfactorily, because it has already been reinforced. For midterm measure, one fine screen, there should be one fine screen that could be removed quickly for allowing the incoming flow to bypass the fine screens. And in the long term, there should be an additional bypass channel as to improve the handling of flow under emergency situations. And there must also be more people on hand, more manpower. We have already increased the manpower. Well, yes, sir. Well, it's all right. Well, these are already included in the report, so I think you should execute or adopt the measures that are necessary. Thank you. Who wants to further address this? Oh, thank you. Thank you. The external consultant will come again, and we have 3 colleagues who are going to follow up together with the consultant. The measures I think we really need to first apply more training to the staff. The DSD would also set up a joint operation review committee to monitor the situation, but you know there's still a gap in between. We're trying to hold more meetings in a trilateral manner. We want the contractor to really monitor more carefully. Because we cannot monitor them 24 hours a day, there must be a system in place. So this is not only a short-term measure. The consultant would come again. We're going to ensure that there would be monitoring by the consultant as well. Thank you. Well, as there are no other members who want to follow up with this item, I hope that the administration learn from this lesson and to listen to the recommendations both by the consultant and by members. Well, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is AOB. There is no AOB. We can now conclude the meeting. Thank you.